Yes, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you are on the eastern seaboard in Australia. My name is Simon Tupman, and I'm the host of the monthly Law Chat, which is coming to you today from Okuni, New Zealand, my home. And a warm welcome to my guest, Fiona McLay, who's joining us from Melbourne in Australia. I'd also like to acknowledge our sponsor every month, Moore Markham's accountants and business advisors, specialising in offering financial services to the legal profession. So thank you to them. My guest today, she started her career as a practicing lawyer in Sydney and kind of morphed into the tech evangelist that she has become today. She's not only a consultant to law firms, but she's also recently written a super book called Tech Enabled Lawyer. I'm delighted its author Fiona joins us now from Australia. Fiona, thanks for joining us on Law Chat.
Thanks for having me, Simon. It's a pleasure.
Super. We're going to talk today about becoming a tech-enabled lawyer. But before I get into that, I'm sure people will be fascinated to hear your journey, how you morphed into the work that you're doing today, having started out as a practicing lawyer in Sydney. How did that come about?
Well, no one's more surprised than I am to find me here. And I was very much a traditional lawyer. I started as a summer clerk in one of the big firms and started doing litigation. And as I was working in that, I really enjoyed the litigation. And it's being a lawyer, you get to learn such interesting things and do such interesting work. But over time, I just became increasingly frustrated with the business model that was in place. And I moved from a big firm to a mid-tier firm, then down to a smaller firm, still doing litigation, and we're still doing quite complex litigation. But what I had seen in sort of, especially in the mid-tier where they were doing a lot of volume insurance work, is that how, and this was back in the 90s, but workflows and how those sort of template systems could really enable people to keep up with processing quite a lot of work. Some of the lawyers there had 500 files. So when I was in the smaller firm, I just was like, well, there are easier ways to do some of this work. And one of the benefits of being in a small firm is if you get hold of a credit card, you can plug things in and try them out. And so I did start to do that. And there was one particular matter where we were brought in and there was big discovery due that week. There was just me and the boss. So I was just trying to, well, if I don't sleep, maybe I can get this discovery done. And I just tried an e-discovery tool, a cheap version of Nuix that was available at the time. And within a day, I had my discovery list. And when I went into the partner, he was pretty much, we'll go back and work on that for another 3 days. But it was just one of those things. Once you could see the power of these tools to enable us to compete with a much better resourced opponent, and our clients could just get really good legal services, but without having to pay for the entire team and the entire. I think there was some manual inefficiencies in the way things were being done. So I could see the value, and once you sort of get that bug, it's really hard to go back from there. And so I started looking for other people who thought the same way I did. And I came in touch with the Centre for Legal Innovation. I went back to College of Law and they were running a Masters of Legal Business. They're still running that course. Did some study about strategy and legal operations and innovation and change management, all these sorts of things. And it was just, wow, there's all these people have worked out the answers to these problems. And all us as lawyers are sitting there going, oh dear, this is hard. I wonder how you could do it. And there are answers. So then I just found that I had this information and I could see people were struggling and lawyers were so busy and they had so much on and there were ways to help them. And so the book really came out of that, me trying to say, I've made these mistakes, I've learned these lessons. Here, let me help you so that you get a bit of a leg up, because this is the stuff you have to grapple with. You haven't got enough time to make mistakes here, and we haven't got any time to reinvent the wheel. Here's how to approach it. And that's where the book came.
Well, excellent, and congratulations on the publication of the book. It's called Tech Enabled Lawyer. What is a tech enabled lawyer according to you?
Look, I have a really loose definition. If you're using a pen and paper or a whiteboard, that's fine. It's a tool. It's if you're thinking about things in a slightly more strategic way than just bashing it out the same way you've always done it. Obviously, there are tech tools that use software and that don't require manual labor, and that are you can reuse data and you can enable data to inform the way you're making decisions. And that, I think that's much better than working in a purely paper-based system. But I'm very encouraging of everybody stepping whatever they need to step. And if you're starting from a completely paper-based with no collaboration, maybe getting everybody moving on to a whiteboard or a pen and paper is a better system. And from there, you can automate it. But I just think it's just starting to think about systems and processes and how that can help. And a lot of lawyers think that tech gets in the way of what they're trying to do. And possibly that's because some of the tech we've had to use hasn't had the greatest user experience. And, you know, sometimes you have to work around the tech to get things. So I'm trying to just help lawyers see that tech can be a force for good. And it's just trying out ways that help you and being open to the possibility that the tech can be useful rather than an impediment.
Well, as an independent reader, and I'm not a practitioner anymore, but tech isn't my greatest strength. And I have to say that I found your approach to the book very refreshing for Luddites like myself, not intimidating. And I like the way in which you basically put forward two ways that people could become a tech-enabled lawyer. Firstly, by giving them a framework to assess really where they're at and what changes they might favorably want to introduce. And secondly, you provided a guide to help people make the most of their existing software. Now, as far as the second aspect of that is concerned, you know, our talk today was going to look at, you know, making the most of the existing tools you've got. And I'm sure that most viewers and listeners today would agree that they probably have got a suite of tools available to them. But in terms of a percentage, I just wonder what, you know, to what extent they are actually making full use of those tools. What's been your experience?
And look, it's not just a legal problem. You know, generally, businesses, and the statistics can be anywhere from, 30%. But most businesses, less than half of the functionality is regularly being used, and there can be a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes it's that lack of training, or people are shown things but then it just doesn't stick. But there is when I go into law firms and look around, I often see there's useful functionality in there that people just don't know about or aren't regularly using. And when we talk about it, sometimes I did know about that, but it just didn't get into my way of doing things. So that's where I think, rather than worrying about what new software should I buy, that a really good, smart decision is to think about, okay, well, what can we do with our existing software? We're already paying for it. People know how to use most of it. How can we just ramp the use of that up? And then work out what do we need to add in to plug where there are gaps. So if the reporting really isn't good, what can we plug in there, but not have to do a wholesale change of practice management system, which is a huge multi-year program.
Yes.
And if you're not using the software properly now, you'll put in a new you'll go through all that disruption and you'll still not be using the software properly, the new software, because you haven't built around the processes and the systems and that continuous improvement mindset that means that your team is always looking to get the most out of the tools that are available.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm sure that this is not a reflection just on legal professionals, but a lot of people, as they go through their business, are always looking for that silver bullet, if you like. And I think you're at pains to point out in the book that there isn't a silver bullet when it comes to technology, but that you advocate that firms basically adopt a strategic approach to adopting tech tools, because if they don't, then effectively you're suggesting that the business will not flatline, it will go into decline. Is that correct?
Yeah, and again, we can see this not just in legal, but where competitors are changing the way that they are engaging with clients and that adopting a more customer-centric way, using digital tools to be able to offer 24/7 services or to improve the quality of their service. If your business is continuing on the same old because the clients are happy with that, what you end up in is a position where the market shifts to the newer ways of providing and accessing legal services, and you've got so much ground to cover up to bridge that gap that it becomes very difficult. And we can see this with things like Netflix and Blockbuster. You know, that Blockbuster business was fine. Nobody was complaining to Blockbuster, but suddenly it became, the market had shifted. Everybody wanted streaming services, and it couldn't bridge that gap. Now, I mean, legal businesses are an entirely, we're talking about personal services. It's an entirely different industry, but the same sort of principle arises where you have to be looking for weak signals about changes in what your customers are asking you for, because nobody comes up and says, oh, you know, this is, I don't want to have to ring up and make an appointment with you. I want to move to a legal provider who offers me an online answer system or something different.
Yeah.
They're not going to tell you that that's what they want, but over time, that's, you know, businesses are being run by millennials. They have different expectations about how services are delivered to them. They have different expectations about being kept up to date. And if you don't start to understand how you can deliver those services and experiment and test it and get it wrong and fix it, it will be too hard to catch up.
So tell me, if you're kind of new to this journey, you know, you've been using tools perhaps only up to 50% of its capability. What is the process that you encourage firms to go through to actually make the most out of what they've currently got, but also keep up with developments in this field in order to maintain that client centricity?
Yeah. So I think there's two things that in that. The first step I talk about is getting yourself aware. And so one part of it is starting to come and listen to people like you who are making guests available who can give some new ideas. But also looking at, I think if you keep out that, how will this improve things for my client? How will this mean that I'm delivering more value to my client? If you can keep that in the front of your mind, then I think that will really help, that when you are changing things, and I recommend changing things bit by bit. It's too hard to do a wholesale everything at once. Just be adding more and more things. Try one client, try one practice area, try one service, you know, chunk it down. And I think if you can always be not just how can I make my life easier and the law firms run smoother, but how can I really improve the value I'm adding to my client? I think that delivers the sort of improvement of business that will give you the lasting benefits that will make going through this continuous process of change worthwhile.
And in terms of being worthwhile, you quote a statistic in the book from a 2019 survey, Australia-New Zealand, survey of 172 lawyers, and I think the statistic there was that 75% of them said that their productivity had increased as a result of adopting new technology. That's a trend that, as I read it, is set to continue.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that the pandemic, for all the terrible times I went through, it did show us that lawyers could change when they had to, and they could work on Zoom, and they didn't have to always be in an office and meeting clients in. And so there were some real productivity gains that came out of moving to working in a more collaborative and more digital-based way.
One of the interesting things too about your book is how specific you get when you talk about certain practice areas. I mean, one can talk in general terms about technology and how it's impacting on law firms, but in the second half of your book, I note that you have a guide there to identify the tech tools needed for, say, for example, practices in the areas of litigation, estates, family, property, in-house, and also commercial. And presumably those tools differ across those practice areas.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I really like to do is try to be practical, because it's all well and good to tell people, oh, well, you should communicate with your clients more. But how? What are the tools? And I'm not recommending any specific tools, but I am just saying, here are some use cases. Here are some ways that tech can help things that you commonly do if you work in these practice areas. I mean, my experience is litigation. That's where I worked, but I worked in a general firm. So we had family, we had estates, we had commercial. I saw how those, and part of while I was changing everything up that I could there, I had to learn what we could do for those areas. And then I worked in-house as a contractor. So I sort of have enough instinct to try to help identify particular tools that solve common problems in those areas. But, by the time I write this book, there's more tools. There's always going to be more tools. But it's that piece around thinking, what am I doing that could be done with a more, is there in a better way? How could where's the problem here that I could try to solve with some other system? And if that's system includes tech, then what are the names of some tools that I can Google, and then I can look for what are the alternatives to that tool. I just think without, we're all too busy to have to do all the research from scratch, and the name of a tool at least helps you see, oh, I see, this is why it would be used.
Very good. Just so that people know, I think this book is somewhere in the region of over 250 to 300 odd pages or so, I think. So there's a lot of detail in there. And I just wondered, whilst we're on this chat, if there's anyone who does have a question for Fiona today, you'd be happy to try and answer it if any come through. In some law chats, we do get questions, some we don't. One thing that I really liked, and you alluded to it today, Fiona, is this aspect of adapting to change and the pace of change. And there was a lovely quote in there when you talk about the cognitive bias. Most people will act to avoid loss rather than act for potential gain. And I think isn't that often the way when it comes to resisting change, and that we tend to stick with what we know has worked for us in the past rather than being prepared to take on risk to introduce change and something that is different.
Absolutely. And I also talk a bit about the lawyer personality, the stereotypical lawyer personality, where you have a risk aversion, and there are there's a lot of pressure to get things right, absolutely right. And if you are working in a way that enables you to hit your billable targets and keep your clients happy and be able to cope, stopping to change that is a big ask. And so even though you may think, oh, this isn't perfect, at least you're coping, and the decision to start tinkering with that can be a hard one.
So who's this book ideally written for? It's not just the top end of town, is it? It's if anything, it's maybe small to mid-tier people who don't have the benefit of an in-house tech person helping them with this stuff.
That was exactly who I had in mind. So, law firm owner, a partner in a firm that is doing fine. They're all performing well. They're doing good work. They've got good clients, but they can see that there are things that they could be doing better, and they need to somehow work out how to steer this ship in a different direction, and don't necessarily have budget for consultants. And look, funnily enough, some of the big firms have been buying the book because they're interested in how to persuade other partners to make use of the tools they have available. So I think this piece around how do we persuade smart, clever, high-performing lawyers to look at the way they are delivering legal services, I think that is endemic across the profession. But certainly the reader I had in mind was somebody in a law firm or a law department who didn't have people around to help them and needed to find a way through. And I think my other message is that even if you are a lawyer in a traditional firm and you're not going to go out and change the business model and start doing value pricing and throw away timesheets, that doesn't mean that all technology is no use to you. You can still start to get your head around this technology and do as much as you can within that business model, and try to get some impetus to change.
In my experience, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but often the impetus for change comes not so much from the partnership, but from the executive. So the practice manager, CEO, business manager, whomever you want to refer to. So perhaps implicit in that is the need for those people to become not just tech enabled, but tech influencers as well. Do you have any advice for those people who might say, okay, where do I start? I've got partners here who don't get it, but I do. And as the practice manager, it's my job to persuade them to invest in either some new technology or to start using our Microsoft suite far more effectively. What would you say to them?
Oh, I have practice managers who have a slightly different problem, where one of the partners is tech savvy and says, get us some tech. We should be, no, unspecific, but, just get us some tech. And so then they have to not only become a tech buyer, a solution designer, a change manager, a communications expert, as well as looking after all, the HR and all the other, their full-time practice job. So that I think it's a big load that sometimes practice managers are asked to bear in smaller firms. But I definitely think, again, the key to this is being strategic and getting the partnership to work with you around what the opportunities are and what the priorities are. And that's that digital roadmap, a strategic digital roadmap about what do we want to try to make use of technology to achieve. Which one are we going to focus on? Here's our 90-day sprint. This is what we're going to do. Then we'll move on to the next thing, because I think the real risk is everybody comes to you with, oh, can we have this tool? Can we have this tool? And they're all good tools. But if you try to implement all of those tools, you'll get nowhere. Whereas if you chunk it down and do 90-day sprints, at least you've got somewhere with 4 tools or one tool, but you've got it into 4 different projects. And I think that's really the only way. And then you've got an answer to people who come to you and say, can we have this tool that's really good? You can not this quarter, because this quarter is X, because that's going to achieve X business objective. That's a good tool. I'll put it on the list, and maybe we can slot that into the next improvement project.
Yes. This might be a difficult question to answer, but from your experience, particularly on the back of your research for the book and your consulting work recently, are there any particular priorities that keep coming up amongst firms, or any particular opportunities that you think firms need to prioritize in order to make the most of technology? Is it a too generalist a question, or is it one that you're able to address?
Oh, look, I'll have a go. I do think generally firms are underusing, if they have Microsoft 365, and a lot do, because that's where Word and Outlook are. They are almost certainly tools in there that they haven't taken advantage of. Things like online booking through the Bookings app. There is Power BI, can do you some really nice real-time dashboards and reporting, and that's not easy to set up, but quite doable with a bit of training. And there's also the ability to do some workflow automation that doesn't involve you having to go out and get a new chatbot tool or some new technology. You can build those sort of automated workflows and generate automatic responses. And that can be a really easy way to test some of these ideas. So when people are saying, oh, I want to have a form that clients can fill in online and they can get this document, and we should buy this tool that will do it. Well, let's try it with a Microsoft Forms and a Power Automate and see whether people do in fact want that. If they do, great, then we can spend some money on a tool that delivers a better experience, but get that minimum viable product up. Family law disclosure is a perpetual headache for people and just having to process all that information. And there are some good tools, some good tech tools that can help make that process less manual. Generally in litigation, e-discovery has sort of been, I think, undervalued in smaller firms. I think it's thought of as it's just for big class actions, but actually the tools are very affordable and really, really useful for getting your head around what's in a case really quickly. I think with transactional work, so commercial and property, I think looking at some of these tools that can give your clients status updates so that you're not being chased to tell them where things are up to and what's the next process, and some visual roadmaps for them about this is what things are going to happen, and just stop people having to ask you the same questions over and over again. What am I up to? Wills and estates, same thing.
Yes.
With, I think there's a lot of templating. I mean, your will template, your will documents, they're complicated documents, but again, there is the potential to do some automation around that and to do some of the explanations about why you might use this particular estate planning scenario. That sort of stuff can be created in cheat sheets or video explainers. So I think that there's ways to use tools there.
And the cost of these tools, they don't have to be expensive, do they?
No, absolutely. And with PowerPoint that's included in 365, you can record your screen and record yourself on screen explaining a document or talking through something. You don't need to have specific video editing software. All of these things are really, really achievable.
So thinking about the future, I know you alluded to Richard Susskind in your book as well, and people have differing views about the extent to which technology's not just going to enable us, but overtake us. And I think you talked there in your book about the impact of robotics or robots, and I think you referred to the growth of cobots in your book. Do you want to talk very briefly about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so a cobot is where you use the automation to do the really dull, dirty, dangerous part, but it works in collaboration with a human. So it might be a robotic arm that can lift the heavy weights, but a human is there to say, right, lift it now and put it down there. So you don't have to program the arm to know where to make all those skill and judgments. And so that's where I think lawyers should be looking. And we are seeing, the development of much better AI tools that can help with some of the heavy load around research or drafting. And I think we're going to need lawyers to do the directing about what's relevant, what's the issue, how do I communicate this, and how do I explain this? But we can be helped by a tech tool that can do just some of the processing all of the data that is available. And we know that the amount of data is just constantly increasing, even if it's the number of emails that people are sending to each other that you have to review for discovery, the number of regulations that are coming out that you have to be on top of in order to advise your client, the number of cases that are now available when you have to look at for what authorities apply on an issue. So I think we should be taking advantage of tech to assist us to extract something meaningful from the data, but not be giving all of that job to the computers, just using them, and then the lawyer being able to guide that and come out with a more meaningful result than what a raw computer output would be.
Do you think the growth of technology will lead to new jobs in this sector?
Oh, absolutely. And it already has. A legal technologist role didn't apply. And I really think that there is going to be more room for legal operations. If you look at the way software is delivered, there is this, you have, products, people who look after a particular product, people who work out what the market needs and how we can sell it. You have solution architects, so people who are going to work out, right, how can we deliver this litigation? Then you might bring in the legal specialists, the aspects, but sort of the product management or the project management piece, and I think there's going to be a much greater operational mindset to make sure that lawyers' time is really focusing on the stuff that they're good at, rather than also asking them to project manage work, sell work, do quality control, do human resources, and, do the accounting. I think the law firm owners often are wearing way too many hats, and that I think that more roles that are going to make use of the tech that can take some of those aspects and will just develop. And I think that a law firm will change the way that we might have way more supporting lawyers, and let lawyers doing less of those it's not side jobs, less of parts of the work.
Yeah. Well, great stuff. You certainly painted the picture that, tech is very much a force for good in these changing times. If people want to get hold of a copy of the book, how can they do that?
Sure. So through my website, www.fionamclay.com and .com.au. So www.fionamclay.com.au.
And that's one C, not two, as I learned.
One C, not two. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Fiona, great. Look, lovely talking to you. Thanks very much for coming on Law Chat today. Best of luck with the book and with all your endeavours. And I'm sure that as an evangelist, you'll convert many people in the months to come, and you will help a lot of people who struggle with this topic. Thanks again for joining us. And until next month, everyone watching, listening, have a good month. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Fiona.
Right,
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.